The fiddle's last note still hung in the air when Eleanor Montgomery felt the first cold splash of lemonade hit her chest, soaking through the blue calico dress she had spent 3 weeks sewing by candlelight. The barn fell silent, except for the crackle of lanterns and the shuffling of boots on fresh-cut pine, as every eye in Coldwater Creek, Texas turned to witness her humiliation on this warm June evening in 1878. "Shameless hussy," Prudence Whitmore hissed, her pinched face twisted with satisfaction as she lowered the empty glass. Dancing like some saloon girl, spinning and laughing without a care for decent propriety. Your mother, God rest her soul, would die of shame all over again if she could see you now. Eleanor stood frozen, sticky liquid dripping from her bodice onto the newly raised barn floor that the whole town had spent the day constructing. Her cheeks burned hotter than the Texas sun, and she could feel the weight of judgment pressing down from all sides. The other young women clustered behind Prudence, their faces a mixture of smugness and pity. She had been too free with her laughter, too quick to accept each dance invitation, too joyful in her movements during the celebration. In a town where women were expected to be demure and restrained, she had forgotten herself in the pure pleasure of music and movement. "I was only dancing," Eleanor managed to whisper, her voice barely audible over the whispers that had erupted throughout the crowd. "Only dancing," Prudence repeated mockingly. "You were making a spectacle of yourself, Eleanor. 4 different partners in a single hour, twirling and carrying on like you were on a stage. Decent women don't draw such attention to themselves. No wonder you're still unmarried at 22, living alone in that tiny homestead your father left you. No respectable man wants a wife who behaves like that." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had worked since dawn, helping raise this barn for the Hendersons, measuring and cutting boards alongside the men because she knew how to handle tools better than most. She had brought 3 pies for the celebration, spent her precious sugar ration to make something special for the community. And this was her reward for one evening of forgetting the loneliness that haunted her days, for letting herself feel young and alive instead of like the struggling orphan everyone pitied. The crowd seemed to press closer, their silence somehow more condemning than words. Eleanor recognized the expressions she had seen too many times before: judgment, disapproval, the same looks that had followed her since her father died 2 years ago, leaving her to manage their small horse ranch alone. The same looks when she wore pants to work her land, when she rode astride instead of side saddle, when she negotiated livestock prices with the same firmness as any man. She was about to flee, to run from the barn into the darkness and never show her face in town again, when a deep voice cut through the whispers like a blade through silk. "Miss Montgomery, I believe you promised me the next dance." Eleanor's head snapped up to find Cole Harrison standing before her, his hat in his hands and his dark eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. She knew who he was. Everyone in 3 counties knew the Harrison name. He ran cattle on the largest ranch in the region, thousands of acres his grandfather had claimed back in the 40s. He rarely came to town gatherings, and Eleanor had never exchanged more than a polite greeting with him in the 4 years since he had returned from driving cattle to Kansas. "I didn't," she started, confusion mixing with her humiliation. "We never spoke. Then I'm asking now." Cole's voice was steady and calm, as if nothing unusual had occurred, as if she wasn't standing in a puddle of lemonade with her dress ruined and her reputation in tatters. He extended his hand to her, palm up, waiting. "Would you do me the honor of this dance, Miss Montgomery?" Prudence made an indignant sound. "Mr. Harrison, surely you can see that Miss Montgomery has made quite enough spectacle for one evening. Perhaps you should choose a more appropriate partner." Cole didn't even glance at Prudence. His eyes remained locked on Eleanor's face, and something in his steady gaze made her spine straighten. "I'm not interested in dancing with anyone else," he said quietly. "Miss Montgomery, would you accept?" Eleanor's hand trembled as she lifted it, placing her fingers in his calloused palm. His hand was warm and strong, and when he closed his fingers around hers, she felt something shift in her chest, some locked door beginning to crack open. Cole led her back to the center of the barn floor, his boots clicking against the wood. The musicians seemed uncertain, their instruments silent as they watched this unexpected development. Cole turned to face the fiddler, an old man named Samuel, who had played at every town gathering for the past 20 years. "Samuel, I'd appreciate a waltz if you would." Samuel's weathered face broke into a slow smile. He lifted his fiddle to his shoulder and drew the bow across the strings, filling the barn with the opening notes of a beautiful, lilting melody. The other musicians joined in, and suddenly the music swelled around them like a protective barrier against the hostile stares. Cole placed his right hand at Eleanor's waist, his touch respectful but firm, and raised their joined hands to the proper position. "Follow my lead," I murmured, and then they were moving, gliding across the floor in smooth, practiced steps. Eleanor had learned to waltz from her mother, who had come from Philadelphia, and insisted that her daughter know the dances of polite society. But she had never danced like this, never felt so perfectly matched to a partner's movements. Cole was an excellent dancer, leading her through turns and patterns with an easy confidence that made her feel weightless, despite her soaked dress and burning cheeks. "Don't look at them," Cole said softly when she started to glance toward the watching crowd. "Look at me." She lifted her eyes to his face and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was no judgment there, no disapproval, just steady attention that made her heart beat faster. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered as they spun past the refreshment table where Prudence stood with her mouth hanging open. "Because you didn't deserve that," Cole replied simply. "And because I wanted to dance with you. You don't even know me. I know enough." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "I know you work harder than most men in this county. I know you have a way with horses that borders on magical. I know you brought old Mrs. Peterson food every week last winter when she was sick, even though you barely had enough for yourself. And I know that watching you dance earlier tonight was the first time I've felt anything but exhaustion in longer than I care to admit." Eleanor's breath caught. She had noticed Cole at the edge of the barn earlier, leaning against a support beam with his arms crossed, watching the festivities with the detached air of someone fulfilling an obligation. She had thought him cold and distant, another wealthy rancher who looked down on struggling homesteaders like herself. "I didn't think you noticed me," she said. "I noticed." The corner of his mouth lifted in a slight smile. Hard not to notice someone who dances like they're hearing music the rest of us can't quite catch. The waltz ended, but before Eleanor could step back, Samuel launched immediately into another tune. Cole's hand remained at her waist, and they continued dancing without missing a beat. "Mr. Harrison," Prudence's sharp voice cut through the music, "surely one dance is sufficient. You're making this situation worse by continuing to partner with—" "If anyone has made this situation worse, Mrs. Whitmore, it's you." Cole's voice was still quiet, but it carried a weight of authority that silenced Prudence mid-sentence. "I suggest you focus on your own behavior rather than judging others for finding joy in an evening meant for celebration." Shocked gasps rippled through the crowd. No one spoke to Prudence Whitmore that way. Her husband owned the general store, and she considered herself the arbiter of social propriety in Coldwater Creek. But Cole Harrison's family had built this county, and his word carried more weight than hers ever would. Cole turned his attention back to Eleanor, dismissing Prudence entirely. "Tell me about your horses," he said as they continued to waltz. "I heard you sold 3 to the cavalry post last month." Eleanor blinked at the change of subject, then found herself relaxing slightly into their dance. 4, actually. They wanted riding horses with good temperaments. My father always said the key was starting them young and being patient with the training. "Your father knew horses," Cole agreed. "I bought 2 mares from him the year before he passed. Best stock horses I've ever owned. One of them just foaled, beautiful filly with her mother's steady nature." They talked about horses as they danced through a second waltz, then a third. Eleanor forgot about her wet dress, forgot about the watching crowd, forgot about everything except the man guiding her across the floor and the surprising ease of their conversation. Cole asked intelligent questions and listened to her answers with genuine interest, treating her knowledge with respect rather than condescension. Other couples eventually joined them on the floor, the tension in the barn gradually easing as the party resumed its celebration. But Cole never released Eleanor's hand, never suggested they take a break or find other partners. When the musicians announced they would play 5 more songs before calling it an evening, Cole claimed every single dance. By the time the final notes faded and the fiddler set down his instrument, Eleanor's head was spinning and her feet ached. But she felt more alive than she had in 2 years. Cole walked her to the edge of the barn where she had left her shawl, his hand steady at her elbow. "Thank you," Eleanor said, turning to face him as she wrapped the shawl around her shoulders to hide her stained dress. "You didn't have to do that, but I'm grateful you did." "I'm not done yet," Cole said. He raised his voice slightly, addressing the crowd that was beginning to disperse into the warm night. "Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll all join me in thanking Miss Montgomery for her hard work today. I understand she was here at dawn, helping frame the north wall. Not many people, man or woman, have that kind of skill and dedication." A smattering of applause followed his words. Some of it sounded genuine, though Eleanor could see Prudence's sour expression, even from across the barn. Cole turned back to her, his voice dropping to a tone meant only for her ears. "May I escort you home, Miss Montgomery?" "I have my wagon," Eleanor said, suddenly nervous. The evening had taken on a dreamlike quality, and she half expected to wake up and find it had all been her imagination. "Then may I follow behind on my horse? It's late to be riding alone." Eleanor knew she should refuse, knew that accepting would only give the gossips more fuel for their fires. But something in Cole's steady gaze made her want to be brave, want to reach for something more than the safe, lonely life she had been living. "I would appreciate that, Mr. Harrison." "Cole," he said, "please call me Cole. Only if you call me Eleanor." His smile was small but genuine, transforming his serious face into something warm and approachable. "Eleanor, then." They walked out into the night together, and Eleanor could feel eyes following them, could imagine the whispers that would start the moment they were out of earshot. But with Cole's solid presence beside her, the weight of judgment seemed lighter than before, more bearable. Her wagon was hitched at the edge of the clearing, where dozens of other vehicles waited. Cole helped her up onto the seat, his hands strong and sure at her waist, lingering just a moment longer than strictly necessary. Eleanor's skin felt warm where he had touched her, even through the layers of fabric. Cole retrieved his horse, a powerful bay gelding with intelligent eyes, and swung into the saddle with the ease of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. He maneuvered his mount beside her wagon, and they set off down the rutted road toward her homestead, 3 miles outside of town. The June night was warm and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Crickets sang in the grass, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. Eleanor usually found comfort in these night sounds, but tonight she was intensely aware of the man riding beside her wagon, his horse's hoofbeats a steady rhythm against the creak of her wheels. "I meant what I said earlier," Cole spoke after they had traveled in silence for several minutes. "About watching you dance. You looked happy." "I was," Eleanor admitted. "I don't allow myself that very often. Being happy seems like a luxury I can't afford when there's always so much work to be done." "I understand that feeling." Cole's voice was thoughtful. "Running the ranch takes everything I have. Some days I'm up before dawn and don't get to bed until midnight. The cattle need constant attention. The hands need direction. There's always a fence that needs mending, or a horse that needs shoeing, or a decision that needs making. It's easy to forget there should be more to life than work." "But you love it," Eleanor said, hearing the underlying pride in his voice. "I do. The land, the animals, building something that will last. My grandfather started with nothing but determination and a land grant. My father expanded it into a real operation. Now it's my turn to leave my mark, to make the Harrison Ranch something that will endure for generations." He paused. "But lately, I've been wondering what the point is of building something for future generations if I never take the time to actually create those generations." Eleanor's heart skipped. She kept her eyes on the road ahead, on the familiar shapes of trees and fence posts illuminated by moonlight. "You're only 26, she said, remembering that much about him from town gossip. "You have plenty of time." "Age doesn't matter much when you're lonely," Cole said quietly. "I have 1,000 head of cattle, 50 horses, a house bigger than I need, and 30 ranch hands who depend on me for their livelihoods. But at the end of the day, I eat dinner alone and sleep in an empty bed and wonder what I'm working so hard for." The raw honesty in his words made Eleanor's throat tight. She knew exactly what he meant, knew the particular ache of falling asleep alone and waking to silence, of having no one to share small victories or daily frustrations with. "I understand," she said softly. "After my father died, I thought I would get used to the quiet, but some days the silence is so heavy I can barely breathe through it." "You never thought about selling the homestead?" Cole asked. "Moving to town, maybe finding work as a seamstress or a teacher?" "Every day," Eleanor admitted, "but that land is all I have left of my family. My father built our cabin with his own hands. My mother planted the apple trees by the creek. Giving it up would feel like betraying their memory. So, I hold on, even though it means working myself to exhaustion and listening to people like Prudence Whitmore tell me I'm too proud for my own good. You're not too proud, Cole said firmly. You're strong. There's a difference. They reached the turnoff to Eleanor's property, marked by a weathered wooden sign her father had carved with their family name. The rutted path led through a stand of cottonwood trees to the small cabin and barn that comprised her homestead. It looked humble in the moonlight, especially compared to what she knew of the Harrison Ranch. But it was hers, and she had fought to keep it. Cole dismounted when Eleanor pulled the wagon to a stop in front of her cabin. He came around to help her down, his hands once again at her waist. And this time, when her feet touched the ground, he didn't immediately step back. They stood close together in the darkness, so close Eleanor could smell leather and sage and something else. Something uniquely him. "Eleanor," he said, his voice rough, "I'd like to call on you, if you would allow it." Her heart hammered against her ribs. People will talk. People are already talking. The question is whether you care enough about their opinions to let them dictate your life. Eleanor thought about the evening, about the humiliation of standing in her ruined dress while Prudence declared her unmarriageable. She thought about all the times she had made herself smaller, quieter, more acceptable to avoid drawing criticism. She thought about the years stretching ahead of her, lonely and gray, if she continued to let fear govern her choices. "I don't want to care anymore," she whispered. "Then don't." Cole lifted one hand and gently brushed a strand of hair back from her face, his fingers warm against her temple. "Let me court you properly. Let me take you to Sunday dinner, drive you to church socials, come by on evenings to sit on your porch and talk. Let me show this town that you deserve to be treated with respect and admiration, not judgment." "Why?" Eleanor asked. "You could court any woman in the county. Why choose me, the one everyone thinks is inappropriate?" Cole's smile was slow and devastating. "Because when I watched you dancing tonight, I saw someone who understands that life is short and joy is precious. Because when you talk about horses, your whole face lights up with passion. Because you're brave enough to hold on to your dreams even when it would be easier to let them go. And because I think you might understand what it's like to be lonely in the middle of a crowd, to work so hard at surviving that you forget what it feels like to actually live." Eleanor's breath shuddered out. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was moving too fast, that she barely knew this man, that accepting his courtship would only bring more criticism and gossip. But her heart, the part of her that had felt dead for 2 years, was suddenly pounding with possibility. "Yes," she said, "you can call on me." Cole's expression transformed, genuine happiness softening the hard lines of his face. "Tomorrow? I have to work the horses in the morning. Then I'll come help you." Eleanor laughed, surprised. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to. I want to. Besides, I'm curious to see your training methods. And I'd like to spend time with you, Eleanor, as much time as you'll give me." The sincerity in his voice made her eyes sting with unshed tears. She couldn't remember the last time someone had wanted her company, had chosen her deliberately and enthusiastically, rather than tolerating her presence out of obligation or pity. "Come at dawn, then," she said. "I'll make breakfast. I'll be here." Cole mounted his horse with fluid grace, then looked down at her with an expression that made her stomach flutter. "Sleep well, Eleanor." "You too, Cole." She watched him ride away, his form gradually disappearing into the darkness until all she could hear was the fading sound of hoofbeats. Only then did she allow herself to touch her waist where his hands had been, to press her fingers against her temple where he had brushed her hair back, to let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, something wonderful was beginning. Eleanor walked into her cabin and lit a lamp, its warm glow pushing back the shadows. The space was small but tidy, everything in its place because she lived alone and had no one to make messes but herself. Her father's chair still sat by the fireplace. Her mother's china still lined the shelves her father had built. Reminders of love and loss, of what she had once had and feared she would never find again. But as she changed out of her ruined dress and washed the sticky lemonade from her skin, Eleanor felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope, fragile as a butterfly wing, but undeniably present. She lay in her narrow bed and thought about Cole's steady gaze, his strong hands, the way he had defended her without making her feel weak. She thought about dancing in his arms, about the easy conversation, about the loneliness he had confessed to. She thought about tomorrow, about him coming at dawn to help with her horses, about the possibility of building something more than just survival. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Eleanor Montgomery fell asleep smiling. The rooster crowed just before sunrise, pulling Eleanor from dreams filled with waltzing and deep voices. She rose quickly, splashing cold water on her face from the basin and pinning her long brown hair into a practical braid. She dressed in her work clothes, a simple cotton dress worn soft with washing, and sturdy boots that had belonged to her father. The morning air was cool and fresh as she stepped outside, carrying a bucket toward the well. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, promising another hot day ahead. Eleanor had just finished drawing water when she heard hoofbeats approaching, and her heart leaped into her throat. Cole rode into her yard as the sun broke over the horizon, and Eleanor had to remind herself to breathe. He looked different in the morning light, more relaxed than he had seemed at the barn raising. He wore working clothes, a plain shirt, and worn denim pants, with a bandana tied loosely around his neck. His hat was pulled low against the rising sun, but she could see his smile as he dismounted. "Good morning," he called. "Am I too early?" "Right on time," Eleanor replied, trying to sound calmer than she felt. "I was about to start the coffee." "Let me help?" Cole tied his horse to her porch railing and took the heavy water bucket from her hands before she could protest. He carried it into the cabin like it weighed nothing, setting it gently on her counter. Eleanor built up the fire in her stove and set the coffee pot to boil, intensely aware of Cole's presence in her small space. He seemed to fill the cabin with his size and energy, making everything feel smaller and more intimate. "You have a nice place," Cole said, looking around with genuine interest. "Your father built this?" "Every board and nail," Eleanor said proudly. "It took him 2 years, working whenever he could spare time from establishing the horse operation. My mother said she lived in a tent and loved every minute of it because she could see their dream taking shape." "They sound like they were happy together." They were. Eleanor measured coffee grounds into the pot, her movements automatic from years of practice. They had the kind of marriage I always hoped to find someday, a real partnership, built on respect and shared dreams. My mother was just as involved in the horse breeding as my father. She had an eye for good bloodlines that he said was better than his own. "Is that where you learned?" Cole asked. "Partly, but I also just love horses. Always have, since I was tiny. I'd rather spend time in the barn than anywhere else." Eleanor pulled down plates and began slicing bread. "Most people think that's strange for a woman. Most people are fools." Cole's blunt statement made her smile. "My grandmother was the same way. She could ride better than any of the ranch hands and wasn't afraid to prove it. My grandfather used to say she was the reason the Harrison Ranch succeeded, because she worked twice as hard as anyone and never accepted less than excellence." They ate breakfast together as the sun climbed higher, sitting at Eleanor's small table and talking easily about horses and ranching. Cole told her about the challenges of managing such a large operation, about his plans to improve his breeding stock and experiment with new grazing rotations. Eleanor found herself relaxing, her initial nervousness fading as she realized how much they had in common, despite their different circumstances. After breakfast, they walked out to Eleanor's barn together. She had 4 horses currently in training, all between 2 and 3 years old. Cole watched with obvious appreciation as she worked with a tall bay mare, using patience and gentle pressure to teach the horse to accept a saddle pad. "You have good hands," Cole observed after several minutes. "Soft but confident, the mare trusts you." "Trust is everything," Eleanor said, running her hand along the mare's neck. "Force will get you obedience, but trust gets you partnership. My father taught me that." Cole spent the entire morning helping her work the horses, and Eleanor was impressed by his skill and intuition. He seemed to understand exactly what she needed without her having to explain, anticipating her movements and supporting her training methods. They worked together with an easy synchronicity that usually took years to develop. Around noon, they took a break in the shade of the barn, drinking cool water from the well and watching the horses graze in the paddock. "I have to admit," Cole said, "I came here planning to help you, but I think I'm the one learning. Your techniques are more refined than anything I've seen." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks at the compliment. "I've had a lot of practice, and a lot of time to think about the best approaches." "Would you consider training some horses for me?" Cole asked. "I have several young stock horses that need work, and after watching you this morning, I can't think of anyone I'd trust more to do it right." Eleanor's eyes widened. "You want to hire me?" "I want to pay you fairly for your expertise and skill," Cole corrected. "This isn't charity, Eleanor. This is business. You're the best horse trainer in the county, and I'd be a fool not to take advantage of that." Pride warmed Eleanor's chest, mixing with a growing affection for this man who saw her capabilities rather than her struggles. "I'd be honored to train your horses." "Cole." "Good." His smile made her stomach flutter. "I'll bring the first two over tomorrow, if that suits you." "Tomorrow is Sunday," Eleanor pointed out. "Don't you go to church?" "I do when I can." "Do you attend services?" Eleanor hesitated. "I used to, but after last night, I'm not sure I'm ready to face the congregation. Prudence Whitmore teaches the women's Bible study, and I have no desire to subject myself to her opinions on proper Christian behavior." Cole's expression hardened. Prudence Whitmore wouldn't know proper Christian behavior if it appeared in a burning bush. Jesus spent his time with outcasts and sinners, not with self-righteous gossips who use religion as a weapon. His fierce defense made Eleanor's throat tight. "You really don't care what people think, do you?" "I care about what's right," Cole said simply. "I care about treating people with decency and respect. Beyond that, other people's opinions are their problem, not mine." He paused, his dark eyes searching her face. "Come to church with me tomorrow, Eleanor. Let me show them that you have nothing to be ashamed of." Fear and longing warred in Eleanor's chest. Part of her wanted to hide, to avoid the stares and whispers. But a bigger part, the part that had come alive during their dances last night, wanted to stand tall and claim her right to exist without apology. "All right," she said, "I'll go with you." The satisfaction in Cole's expression made her decision feel right, like maybe she was finally learning to be brave. Cole stayed until late afternoon, helping Eleanor with chores and repairs around the homestead. He fixed a loose board on her barn wall, checked her fences for damage, and helped her move hay bales that she had been dreading tackling alone. They worked well together, falling into an easy rhythm that felt natural and right. When Cole finally mounted his horse to leave, he looked down at Eleanor with an expression that made her pulse race. "I'll pick you up for church at 9 tomorrow morning," he said. "Wear your best dress and hold your head high. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Eleanor Montgomery. Remember that." Eleanor watched him ride away, her heart full of emotions she wasn't quite ready to name. She spent the evening preparing for Sunday, pressing her good dress and polishing her mother's cameo brooch. She told herself she was being practical, but deep down, she knew she wanted to look her best for Cole, wanted to be worthy of the faith he was placing in her. Sunday morning dawned clear and warm. Eleanor dressed carefully in her best outfit, a green cotton dress with lace at the collar that brought out the color of her eyes. She pinned her mother's brooch at her throat and arranged her hair in a neat bun, allowing a few soft curls to frame her face. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above her washstand, she saw a woman who looked determined rather than defeated, and that felt like a victory. Cole arrived precisely at 9, driving a sleek black buggy pulled by a matched pair of horses. He helped Eleanor up onto the seat, his hand lingering at her waist, and she noticed he was wearing a suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. He looked handsome and distinguished, every inch the successful rancher. The drive to town took 30 minutes, and they spent it talking about everything and nothing. Cole told her about his childhood, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the year he spent in Kansas City learning business management before returning to take over the ranch. Eleanor shared memories of her parents, stories she hadn't told anyone in years because there had been no one who wanted to listen. When they arrived at the church, a simple white building with a tall steeple, Eleanor's courage faltered. She could see people gathered on the steps, their Sunday best, a contrast to the dusty street. Several heads turned as Cole's buggy approached, and Eleanor saw recognition and surprise flash across multiple faces. "Breathe," Cole said softly. He set the brake and came around to help her down, his hands strong and steady at her waist. When her feet touched the ground, he offered his arm, a clear statement of his intentions. Eleanor placed her hand in the crook of his elbow and let him guide her toward the church steps. The crowd parted as they approached, whispers following in their wake like the rustle of dry leaves. Eleanor kept her chin up and her eyes forward, drawing strength from Cole's solid presence beside her. She could feel dozens of eyes on them, could imagine the gossip that would dominate dinner tables across the county. "Good morning, Reverend Michaels," Cole said warmly as they reached the pastor, an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Cole, it's good to see you, the Reverend replied. He turned to Eleanor with genuine warmth. Miss Montgomery, what a pleasure. I've been hoping you would return to services. Thank you, Reverend, Eleanor managed, touched by his sincere welcome. They entered the church, and Cole led her to a pew near the front, another deliberate statement. Eleanor could feel eyes boring into her back, could hear the whispers increasing in volume. She spotted Prudence Whitmore 3 rows back, her face pinched with disapproval. The service began, and Eleanor tried to focus on the Reverend's words rather than the weight of judgment pressing down on her shoulders. Cole sat close beside her, their arms touching, a constant reminder that she wasn't alone. When they stood to sing hymns, his deep voice blended with hers in harmony, and when they bowed their heads to pray, she felt his hand brush against hers in silent support. Reverend Michaels preached about grace and forgiveness, about judging not, lest ye be judged. Eleanor wondered if he had chosen the topic deliberately, if perhaps he had heard about Friday night's incident. Several times during the sermon, she noticed him looking pointedly at Prudence's section of pews. After the service ended, Cole once again offered Eleanor his arm and led her outside into the bright sunshine. Other churchgoers filed out around them, and Eleanor braced herself for confrontation. Miss Montgomery, Mr. Harrison. Mrs. Henderson, the woman whose barn they had raised on Friday, approached with a warm smile. Thank you both again for all your help on Friday. That barn went up so quickly because of folks like you who know how to work. It was our pleasure, Mrs. Henderson, Cole replied. Several other people approached to offer greetings, most of them friendly, or at least neutral. Eleanor started to relax, thinking perhaps the morning wouldn't be as difficult as she had feared. Then Prudence Whitmore materialized in front of them, her expression righteous and condemning. Her husband Luther stood slightly behind her, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Harrison, Prudence said, her voice carrying across the churchyard. I'm surprised to see you escorting Miss Montgomery today. After her shocking behavior on Friday, I would have thought a man of your standing would distance himself from such inappropriate association. Cole's expression went cold and hard. Mrs. Whitmore, the only shocking behavior I witnessed on Friday was your own. Throwing a drink on another person and publicly humiliating them is hardly Christian conduct. Prudence's face flushed red. I was correcting improper behavior. Someone needed to remind Miss Montgomery that decent women don't make spectacles of themselves. Decent women don't attack others for experiencing joy, Cole countered. His voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the calm surface. Miss Montgomery worked all day helping raise the Hendersons' barn. She brought food to share and participated in the celebration that was meant to thank all the volunteers. She danced with several partners, as did most of the young women present. The only difference was that she didn't hide her happiness, and you punished her for it. She was drawing attention to herself in an unseemly manner, Prudence insisted. Laughing too loud, spinning around like a child. It was embarrassing to watch. What's embarrassing, Eleanor found her voice, surprising herself with its steadiness, is that you're so afraid of joy you have to destroy it in others. I'm sorry my happiness offended you, Mrs. Whitmore, but I'm not sorry I experienced it, and I won't apologize for dancing or laughing or allowing myself to feel alive. Prudence's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Several people nearby had stopped to listen, their expressions ranging from shocked to impressed. You need to learn your place, Prudence finally sputtered. My place, Eleanor said firmly, is wherever I choose to stand. And right now, I choose to stand here, with a man who treats me with kindness and respect. Good day, Mrs. Whitmore. Cole's smile was proud as he guided Eleanor away from the sputtering woman. They walked to his buggy, accompanied by whispers, but this time, Eleanor didn't care. She had found her voice, and it felt powerful. That was magnificent, Cole said as he helped her into the buggy. You were magnificent. Eleanor's hands were shaking with adrenaline, but she felt strangely exhilarated. I've never stood up to her before. I've never stood up to anyone. You're stronger than you think, Eleanor. Cole climbed up beside her and took up the reins. Where would you like to go? I'm not ready to take you home yet. Neither am I, Eleanor admitted. Show me your ranch? I've heard so much about it, but I've never seen it. Cole's smile was brilliant. I'd like nothing more. They drove out of town and onto the open range, heading west toward the Harrison spread. The landscape rolled away in gentle hills covered with prairie grass and wildflowers. Cattle grazed in the distance, and Eleanor could see the distinctive Harrison brand on their flanks. The ranch house came into view after 20 minutes of driving, and Eleanor caught her breath. It was larger than she had imagined, a sprawling two-story structure built of stone and timber, a wide porch wrapped around the front, and she could see flower beds carefully tended along the foundation. "My grandmother planted those roses," Cole said, following her gaze. She said even a working ranch needed beauty. He gave her a complete tour, showing her the barns and corrals, the bunkhouse where his hands lived, the blacksmith shop and tack rooms. Everything was well maintained and organized, reflecting the care and pride Cole took in his operation. The ranch hands they encountered tipped their hats respectfully to Eleanor, and she could see the genuine respect they had for their boss. The house itself was beautiful, with high ceilings and large windows that let in plenty of light. The furniture was solid and practical, but well made, and Eleanor could see feminine touches throughout, evidence of Cole's grandmother's influence. "It's a wonderful home," Eleanor said, as they stood in the spacious kitchen. "But I can see what you meant about it being too big for one person." "It was built for a family," Cole said quietly. He was standing close to her, near enough that she could feel the heat of his body. "My grandparents raised 6 children here. My parents had 4, though 2 died young. The house remembers what it's like to be full of life and laughter. I think it misses that." Eleanor turned to look up at him, her heart pounding. "Cole, I know this is fast," he said, reaching up to cup her face with one hand. "I know I should court you properly for months before saying anything. But, Eleanor, I'm 26 years old, and I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. Watching you work your horses yesterday, seeing you stand up to Prudence Whitmore today, dancing with you on Friday night. I keep thinking that maybe I've been waiting for you without even knowing it." "I feel it too," Eleanor whispered. "It terrifies me how much I feel it. We barely know each other. Then let's fix that." Cole's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, a touch so gentle it made her ache. "Spend time with me. Let me court you properly. Let me show you what we could build together." Eleanor knew she should be cautious, should protect her heart, and move slowly. But standing in Cole's beautiful empty house, feeling the warmth of his touch and seeing the hope in his eyes, caution felt like cowardice. "Yes," she said simply. Cole's kiss was soft and sweet, a question rather than a demand. Eleanor's eyes fluttered closed as she leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart beating fast beneath her palms, as racing as her own. The kiss deepened slightly, becoming more confident, and Eleanor felt heat bloom through her entire body. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "Eleanor Montgomery," he said, his voice rough. "I think I'm falling in love with you." "I think I'm falling in love with you too," Eleanor admitted, "which is completely insane considering we've known each other for less than 2 days. Cole laughed, the sound joyful and free. "Who says love has to be sensible? My grandparents met on a Monday and were married by Saturday. They had 52 years together before my grandfather passed. Sometimes you just know." Eleanor thought about her parents, about the stories her mother had told of meeting her father, and knowing within a week that he was the one she would marry. She had always thought those stories were exaggerated, romantic embellishments of a more prosaic reality. But now, standing in Cole's arms with her heart racing and her future suddenly bright with possibility, she understood that sometimes love simply happened, fast and certain and undeniable. They spent the rest of Sunday together, and Eleanor felt herself relaxing into the rightness of it. Cole was easy to be with, comfortable in a way that usually took years to develop. They talked about everything, their conversation flowing naturally from serious to silly and back again. Cole made her laugh with stories about cattle drives and stubborn horses, and Eleanor found herself sharing dreams she had kept locked away, plans for expanding her breeding operation that had seemed impossible when she was alone. As the sun began to set, Cole drove Eleanor home, both of them reluctant to end the day. At her cabin, he kissed her again, slower this time, more thorough, until Eleanor's knees felt weak and her head spun. "I'll bring those horses over tomorrow," Cole said against her lips. "And then I'm not leaving until you make me." Eleanor smiled. "That might be a while." "Good." The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and courtship that left Eleanor exhausted and happier than she had ever been. Cole brought 2 young horses for training, Beautiful animals with good bloodlines that responded well to Eleanor's methods. But more than that, he brought himself, showing up every morning at dawn and staying until dark. They worked side by side, training horses and repairing fences and managing all the endless tasks that came with ranching. Cole brought lumber to expand Eleanor's barn, hired 2 of his ranch hands to help with the heavy construction, and never once made her feel like she was accepting charity. He treated her as an equal partner, valuing her opinions and respecting her expertise. In the evenings, they sat on Eleanor's porch and talked until the stars came out, sharing stories and dreams and quiet moments that felt sacred. Cole was courting her properly, but there was nothing tentative about his intentions. He made it clear through word and action that he was building toward a future, that he saw Eleanor as his partner in all things. The town noticed, of course. Everywhere Eleanor went, she could feel eyes following her, hear whispers trailing in her wake. Some of the gossip was cruel, speculation that Cole was simply amusing himself with her and would eventually move on to someone more appropriate. But increasingly, Eleanor noticed a shift in how people treated her. Merchants were more respectful when she came to purchase supplies. Other ranchers started asking her advice about their horses. Even some of the women who had stood silently by while Prudence humiliated her began offering tentative smiles. Cole's attention had given her a kind of protection, a shield against the worst of the judgment. But more than that, his faith in her had given Eleanor confidence in herself. She stopped apologizing for taking up space, stopped making herself smaller to avoid criticism. She was a skilled horse trainer and a hard worker, and a woman worthy of respect, and if people didn't see that, it was their failing, not hers. One evening in late July, as they sat on Eleanor's porch watching fireflies dance in the growing darkness, Cole took her hand and turned to face her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Eleanor, I want to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer." Eleanor's heart began to pound. "All right. I know we've only been courting for 6 weeks. I know that by conventional standards, that's far too soon for what I'm about to propose. But I've never been much for convention, and I don't want to waste time on arbitrary rules when I'm certain about what I want." Cole took both her hands in his dark eyes intense and serious. "I love you, Eleanor. I love your strength and your kindness and your passion. I love the way you laugh and the way you work and the way you see the world. I love who I am when I'm with you, and I can't imagine going back to a life without you in it." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Cole, marry me," he said simply. "Come to the ranch as my wife. Bring your horses and your dreams and your fierce independence. Help me fill that big empty house with life and laughter. Build something extraordinary with me, something that will last beyond both our lifetimes. I'm not asking you to give up anything. I'm asking you to gain everything. A true partnership where we support each other and grow together and create a legacy worthy of the love I feel for you." Eleanor's tears spilled over, tracking down her cheeks. Every practical bone in her body said this was too fast, too risky. But her heart, the part of her that had come alive the moment Cole asked her to dance, knew this was exactly right. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Cole's shout of joy probably carried all the way to town. He swept Eleanor up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. When he finally set her down, he kissed her with a passion that left no doubt about his feelings, and Eleanor kissed him back with all the love and hope and gratitude that filled her heart. "When?" Cole asked when they finally came up for air. "I don't want to wait, Eleanor. I've waited 26 years to find you. I don't want to waste another day." "Neither do I," Eleanor said. She thought for a moment, practical considerations intruding on her joy. "But I need time to arrange things. I can't just abandon my homestead. The horses need to be moved. My parents' belongings need to be packed carefully. And there's the question of what to do with the land itself." "Keep it," Cole said immediately. "Hold on to it as your property. We can hire someone to maintain it, or use it as a satellite operation for the ranch. But don't give up what your father built, Eleanor. That land is part of your heritage, and I would never ask you to surrender it." His immediate understanding, his respect for what her homestead meant to her, made Eleanor fall in love with him even more deeply. 2 weeks then. Give me 2 weeks to settle my affairs and prepare properly. Then I'll marry you and move to the ranch." 2 weeks, Cole agreed. He pulled her close, tucking her head under his chin. "Eleanor Harrison. It has a nice sound to it." Eleanor smiled against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Yes, it does. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Cole hired a crew to help Eleanor pack and prepare for the move, treating her belongings with the care and respect they deserved. They moved her horses to the Harrison Ranch, settling them into a section of barn that Cole declared was Eleanor's domain, where she could continue her training operation without interference. Eleanor went through her parents' possessions with loving attention, carefully wrapping her mother's china and her father's tools, packing away photo albums and letters and all the precious reminders of the people who had loved her first. She cried as she worked, grieving all over again for what she had lost. But there was joy mixed with the sadness now. Her parents would have loved Cole, would have been thrilled to see their daughter finding the kind of partnership they had shared. On her last night in the cabin, Eleanor walked through the rooms one final time, saying goodbye to the life she had known. The walls held so many memories, echoes of laughter and love and loss. But they also held loneliness and struggle and the heavy weight of survival. Eleanor was ready to move forward, to build something new without erasing what had come before. They had decided on a simple wedding at the church, with Reverend Michaels officiating and just a few close friends in attendance. Eleanor didn't have family left, and Cole's parents had passed years ago, but several of Cole's ranch hands asked permission to attend, as did Mrs. Henderson and a few other townspeople who had been kind to Eleanor over the years. The morning of her wedding dawned clear and beautiful, the late August heat tempered by a gentle breeze. Eleanor dressed in her best dress, the green one she had worn to church that first Sunday with Cole, and pinned her mother's cameo at her throat. She had no veil or fancy trousseau, but she felt beautiful because she was happy, because she was choosing this life and this man with her whole heart. Cole met her at the church, looking devastatingly handsome in a dark suit, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. They stood before Reverend Michaels and spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and cherish each other through all the challenges and joys that lay ahead. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed Eleanor with a tenderness that made her tears fall, happy tears this time, tears of joy and relief and overwhelming love. The small gathering applauded, and even Eleanor noticed that several of Cole's rough ranch hands were wiping their eyes. The celebration afterward was held at the Harrison Ranch, with tables set up on the wide lawn and food contributed by neighbors who had come to accept that Cole Harrison had chosen his bride and wasn't interested in their opinions about it. There was music and dancing, and this time, when Eleanor spun and laughed without restraint, everyone smiled and applauded rather than judging her. Prudence Whitmore had not been invited and did not attend, which Eleanor considered a blessing. She later heard through town gossip that Prudence had expressed strong opinions about the marriage, predicting doom and disaster for such a hasty union. Eleanor didn't care. She had learned that lesson well over the past weeks. Other people's bitterness and negativity were their burden to carry, not hers. As the sun set and the party wound down, Cole led Eleanor into the ranch house, their home now, and up the stairs to the master bedroom. Eleanor's heart raced with nervousness and anticipation as Cole closed the door behind them, shutting out the world and leaving just the two of them in the lamplight. "I love you," Cole said, pulling her close. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, on us." "Thank you for seeing me," Eleanor replied, reaching up to touch his face. "Thank you for defending me and believing in me and making me brave enough to reach for what I wanted." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a claiming and a surrender all at once. Cole was gentle with Eleanor, patient and considerate, making sure she felt cherished and desired. They discovered each other slowly, learning the landscape of skin and breath and heartbeat, building intimacy through touch and whispered words and shared pleasure. Afterward, lying wrapped in Cole's arms with her head on his chest, Eleanor felt a peace she had never known. She was home, not just in this house, but in this man's embrace. She had found her place, her purpose, her partner. "What are you thinking?" Cole asked, his hand stroking through her loose hair. "That I'm happy," Eleanor said simply. "That I didn't think I would ever feel this way again after my parents died. That I'm grateful for barn raisings and waltzes and the courage to keep dancing even when people told me to stop." Cole kissed the top of her head. "Dance with me forever, Eleanor." "Forever," she promised. The next months brought adjustments and challenges as Eleanor settled into her new life, but they faced everything together. Eleanor threw herself into the ranch operations, bringing her horse training expertise to bear on Cole's breeding program. She had ideas about bloodlines and training techniques that Cole immediately recognized as brilliant, and he gave her free rein to implement her vision. The horses Eleanor trained became famous throughout Texas for their intelligence and gentle temperaments. Cavalry posts, stage lines, and wealthy ranchers from 3 states sought out Harrison-trained horses, willing to pay premium prices for animals that carried Eleanor's guarantee. What had started as Eleanor's survival strategy on her small homestead became a thriving business that added significantly to the ranch's reputation and profits. Cole treated Eleanor as a true partner in all aspects of the ranch. They made decisions together, combining his business acumen and her animal expertise into a formidable team. The ranch hands quickly learned that Eleanor's orders carried the same weight as Cole's, and they respected her knowledge and fair treatment of both people and animals. In town, Eleanor's position as Cole Harrison's wife opened doors that had been closed to her as a struggling homesteader. But Eleanor didn't let her new status change who she was. She remained kind to those who had been kind to her, and coolly polite to those who suddenly wanted to befriend her after rejecting her before. She and Prudence Whitmore maintained an icy distance, acknowledging each other with the barest civility when forced into proximity at church or community gatherings. Eleanor continued to wear practical clothes for ranch work, still favored pants when it made sense for the task at hand, and never apologized for her competence or capability. She had learned the hard way that she couldn't please everyone, and she had decided to focus on pleasing herself and the man she loved instead. As autumn gave way to winter and then to spring again, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. The joy and terror of that realization hit her simultaneously. She had always wanted children, but the thought of bringing a new life into the world filled her with anxiety about all the things that could go wrong. Cole's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He gathered her into his arms and held her close, his voice thick with emotion as he thanked her for the gift she was giving him. Then he immediately began worrying about her health and safety, insisting she needed to rest more and work less. Eleanor laughed at his overprotective attitude, but was touched by it too. They compromised, with Eleanor agreeing to avoid heavy lifting and dangerous work, while Cole agreed to let her continue training horses and participating in ranch operations as long as she felt well. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Eleanor bloomed with health and happiness. Her body changed, growing round with their child, and Cole seemed to find her more beautiful than ever, constantly touching her growing belly and talking to the baby who would arrive in early summer. On a warm June evening in 1879, exactly 1 year after the barn-raising party where everything had begun, Eleanor went into labor. Cole stayed by her side through the long night, holding her hand and wiping her face with cool cloths, his presence a steady anchor through the waves of pain. Just after dawn, their son was born, a healthy baby boy with a surprisingly loud cry and dark hair like his father's. Cole wept openly as he held his son for the first time, his big hands cradling the tiny infant with infinite gentleness. "What should we name him?" Eleanor asked, exhausted but happy, watching her husband bond with their child. "I'd like to name him after your father, if that would please you," Cole said. "James Montgomery Harrison." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. That Cole would honor her father's memory this way, would give their son a connection to the grandfather he would never meet, touched her deeply. "James," she agreed. "It's perfect." Little James proved to be a content baby, sleeping well and smiling early. Cole was a devoted father, coming in from ranch work multiple times a day to check on his wife and son, always ready to hold the baby or change a diaper or walk the floor during fussy evenings. Eleanor watched her strong, capable husband become gentle and tender with their child, and fell in love with him all over again. As James grew from infant to toddler, Eleanor and Cole settled into the rhythm of raising a family while running a thriving ranch operation. Eleanor trained horses while keeping an eye on James, playing in the safe paddock they had built near the barn. Cole taught his son to ride before he could walk properly, holding him safe in the saddle and introducing him to the animals that would be his heritage. When James was 2, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was more difficult than the first, with morning sickness that lasted well into the second trimester and exhaustion that forced her to slow down more than she liked. But Cole was patient and supportive, taking on extra duties without complaint and making sure Eleanor rested. Their daughter was born in March of 1882, a tiny thing with Eleanor's light brown hair and bright green eyes. They named her Sarah, after Cole's grandmother, who had planted the roses and helped build the ranch into what it had become. Sarah was more spirited than James had been, crying louder and demanding more attention, but both parents were smitten with their fierce little daughter. James, now a curious 3-year-old, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and show her his toys. Life on the ranch continued to flourish. Eleanor's horse training operation expanded, and they built a second barn specifically for her breeding program. Cole's cattle business thrived as well, and they purchased additional land, expanding the Harrison holdings into one of the most successful ranches in Texas. But beyond the material success, what mattered most was the family they had built. The big house that had once been so empty now rang with children's laughter and running footsteps. Toys scattered across the floors, finger paintings decorated the kitchen walls, and every room held evidence of a family living and loving and growing together. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Cole took Eleanor back to the Henderson place, where the barn they had raised together still stood solid and strong. Mrs. Henderson had passed on by then, but her son welcomed them warmly and gave them permission to wander the property. Eleanor and Cole stood in the barn, now weathered by 5 years of use, and remembered that fateful evening when everything had changed. "Do you ever regret it?" Cole asked, pulling Eleanor into his arms. "The gossip, the judgment, all the difficulty that came from choosing me?" Eleanor laughed and stood on tiptoe to kiss him. "Not for a single second. You gave me back my life, Cole. You made me brave enough to reach for happiness instead of just surviving. You've given me a family, a home, a purpose beyond just getting through each day. How could I ever regret that?" "I'm the one who should be grateful," Cole said, his arms tightening around her. "You filled my empty house and my empty heart. You made me remember what I was working for, why building something lasting matters. You gave me James and Sarah and a future bright with possibility." They swayed together in the barn, dancing to music only they could hear. And Eleanor thought about that night 5 years ago, when she had been shamed for dancing, when Cole had asked her for every dance after. That single act of defiance and support had changed everything, had set them both on a path toward love and partnership, and the kind of happiness that seemed too good to be true. The years continued to pass in a blur of work and joy, and the small challenges that make up a life well lived. Eleanor and Cole added 2 more children to their family, another son named Thomas, born in 1884, and a second daughter named Catherine, who arrived in 1887 and was the baby of the family. Their children grew up strong and capable, raised by parents who treated each other with respect and affection, who worked as partners and celebrated each other's strengths. James showed early talent with horses and followed his mother into the training business. Sarah was fascinated by the business side of ranching and could calculate profit margins in her head by the time she was 10. Thomas loved the cattle and spent every moment he could with the herds, learning to read the weather and the grass and the animals themselves. Little Catherine was still young, but she showed signs of having inherited both her mother's determination and her father's steady leadership. Eleanor's original homestead remained in her name, maintained by a young couple they hired who were just starting out, much like Eleanor had been years before. Eleanor visited regularly, walking through the cabin where she had lived through grief and loneliness, remembering the girl she had been before Cole Harrison asked her to dance. The town of Coldwater Creek grew and changed over the years. Some of the old guard, including Prudence Whitmore, eventually moved away or passed on. New families arrived, and the community slowly became less rigid in its judgments and expectations. Eleanor's success and obvious happiness had quietly challenged old assumptions about what women could do and who they could be. On their 10th anniversary, Cole surprised Eleanor by hosting a celebration at the ranch, inviting everyone they knew to help mark the occasion. A band played in the yard, and tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by neighbors and friends. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Cole stood and raised his glass to make a toast. 10 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the gathering, I watched a woman dance with such joy and freedom that it took my breath away. When small-minded people tried to shame her for that happiness, I knew I had to do something. So I asked her to dance, and she said yes. That single dance changed my life, gave me everything I have today. So I want to propose a toast to my wife, Eleanor, who taught me that love is worth fighting for, that happiness is worth reaching for, and that sometimes the best decisions are the ones that make no sense on paper, but feel absolutely right in your heart. To Eleanor. To Eleanor, the crowd echoed, glasses raised. Eleanor stood and joined Cole, tears streaming down her face. She looked out at the gathering of friends and neighbors, at her 4 beautiful children playing with other kids near the barn, at the ranch that had become her home and her legacy. "I only have one thing to add," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Cole, for asking me to dance. And thank you for dancing with me every day since. You've given me a life beyond my wildest dreams." The celebration continued late into the night, with dancing and laughter and joy. Eleanor danced with Cole, with each of their children, with ranch hands and neighbors and friends. She danced without restraint or apology, her happiness clear for everyone to see, and no one dared to suggest she should do otherwise. As the years continued to roll by, Eleanor and Cole aged gracefully together, their hair graying and their faces gaining lines, but their love only deepening with time. They weathered droughts and market fluctuations, illnesses and injuries, all the challenges that come with ranching and raising a family. But they faced everything together, supporting each other through difficulties and celebrating victories as a team. Their children grew to adulthood and started making their own paths. James took over the horse training operation, expanding it beyond even what Eleanor had accomplished. He married a kind woman named Rebecca, who shared his love of horses, and they gave Eleanor and Cole their first grandchildren, twin boys who seemed to be born in the saddle. Sarah shocked everyone by announcing her intention to study business formally. With Cole's full support and funding, she traveled to St. Louis to attend a women's college, one of the first in the region to offer serious business education to female students. She returned with new ideas and modern techniques that helped expand the ranch's operations even further. Thomas inherited his father's love of cattle ranching and his mother's innovative spirit. He experimented with new breeding techniques and grazing rotations, always pushing to improve the quality of their stock and the sustainability of their land use. Catherine, the youngest, turned out to have a gift for healing. She became fascinated with veterinary medicine and convinced her parents to let her apprentice with the traveling veterinarian who serviced their area. She learned everything she could about animal care and eventually established her own practice, becoming one of the few female veterinarians in Texas and serving ranchers throughout the region. Eleanor and Cole watched their children flourish with pride and gratitude, knowing that the partnership they had built and the example they had set had given their children permission to follow their own passions and forge their own paths. On their 25th anniversary in 1903, Cole and Eleanor sat on their porch in the evening, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. Their hair was silver now, their hands marked with the scars and calluses of decades of hard work, but they still sat close together, still reached for each other's hands without thinking. "Do you remember that first night?" Cole asked, his thumb stroking across Eleanor's knuckles. "When I walked you home from the barn raising?" "Every detail," Eleanor said. "I remember thinking you were the most handsome man I had ever seen, and being terrified that I was falling in love with you too fast." "Was it too fast?" Cole asked with a smile. "No," Eleanor said firmly. "It was exactly right. We didn't waste time trying to fit into other people's expectations or following arbitrary rules. We knew what we wanted and we reached for it. That courage gave us 25 years of happiness and 4 amazing children and a legacy that will outlast us both." "I asked you to dance," Cole said softly. "That's all I did. One small act of defiance against small-minded cruelty." "You did more than that," Eleanor corrected. "You saw me when everyone else was determined to look away. You defended me when I couldn't defend myself. You believed in me when I was struggling to believe in myself. You asked me to dance, yes, but you also asked me to hope, to dream, to reach for something better than just survival. You asked me to love and be loved. That wasn't a small thing, Cole. That was everything." Cole leaned over and kissed her, soft and sweet. A kiss that held 25 years of love and partnership and shared dreams. When they pulled apart, both smiling, Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. More years passed, bringing the new century and all its changes. Automobiles appeared on the roads, electricity came to the larger towns, and the wild frontier that Eleanor and Cole had known in their youth gradually transformed into something more civilized and settled. Their children married and had children of their own, filling the ranch with grandchildren who climbed trees and rode horses and grew up knowing they were loved and valued. Eleanor taught her granddaughters to ride astride and her grandsons to cook, deliberately ignoring gender expectations and encouraging each child to explore their own interests and talents. As Eleanor entered her 60s, she finally began to slow down, her body no longer able to keep pace with her still sharp mind and indomitable spirit. Cole slowed down with her, delegating more responsibility to their children and grandchildren, content to supervise rather than direct every detail. They spent more time together in those later years, taking walks around the property, sitting on their porch in comfortable silence, reminiscing about the years they had shared. They had built something extraordinary together, something that would continue long after they were gone. The Harrison Ranch was thriving under the next generation's management, and their children and grandchildren carried forward the values of hard work, integrity, and compassion that Eleanor and Cole had instilled in them. On a warm June evening in 1910, 32 years after that fateful barn-raising party, Eleanor and Cole sat on their porch and watched the sunset for what would turn out to be one of the last times. Eleanor was 74 years old, Cole was 78, and both were slowing down in ways that made it clear their time together was growing shorter. "Do you have any regrets?" Eleanor asked, a question they had asked each other many times over the years. "Only that we won't have another 32 years together," Cole said, his voice rough with age but still strong. "I could live 1,000 years with you, and it wouldn't be enough." "I feel the same way," Eleanor said, squeezing his hand. "But Cole, we've been so blessed. We found each other when we both needed saving. We built a family, a legacy, a love story that our grandchildren will tell their grandchildren about. We lived fully and loved deeply and made every day count. Not everyone can say that." "No," Cole agreed. "Not everyone gets as lucky as we did." They sat together as the stars emerged, holding hands and remembering. They remembered dances and kisses, arguments and reconciliations, the births of their children and the deaths of beloved friends. They remembered building and planting and nurturing, creating something beautiful out of hard work and love. They remembered every precious moment of their years together, holding them close like treasures. Eleanor passed peacefully in her sleep in the autumn of 1911, surrounded by family, with Cole holding her hand to the very end. She was 75 years old and had lived a life full of love and purpose and joy. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched, and the stories shared the day painted a picture of a woman who had been strong and kind, brave and compassionate, someone who had changed her corner of the world for the better. Cole mourned deeply, but not bitterly. He had been given 33 years with the love of his life, had watched her flourish and grow, had built an extraordinary life together. He missed her with every breath, but he was grateful for what they had shared, rather than angry about what had been taken. He lived for 2 more years, staying active and involved in the ranch operations, spending time with his children and grandchildren, making sure the legacy he and Eleanor had built would continue. He spoke often about Eleanor, keeping her memory alive through stories and laughter, making sure the younger grandchildren, who hadn't known her well, understood what a remarkable woman she had been. Cole Harrison passed away in his sleep in the spring of 1913, at the age of 81. His children found him in the morning, peaceful and still, with a slight smile on his face. On his bedside table was a faded photograph from their wedding day. Eleanor in her green dress with her mother's cameo, Cole in his suit, both of them smiling at the camera with joy and hope and the confidence of people who knew they had found something precious. They buried Cole next to Eleanor on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The entire county attended the funeral, paying respects to a man who had been respected for his integrity, admired for his success, and loved for his kindness. At the funeral, their oldest son James stood to speak about his parents. He told the story they all knew, about a barn-raising party and a woman shamed for dancing, about a cowboy who asked her for every dance after. He talked about the love his parents had shared, the partnership they had modeled, the values they had instilled in their children. "My parents taught us that love is worth fighting for," James said, his voice carrying across the gathering. "They showed us that happiness requires courage, that building something lasting takes work, and that the best things in life often come from the moments when we choose to be brave rather than safe." They danced through life together, supporting each other, celebrating each other, never losing sight of what mattered most. And they left us with a legacy not just of land and livestock, but of love and integrity, and the knowledge that we too can build lives worth living. The Harrison Ranch continued to thrive for generations, always under the stewardship of Eleanor and Cole's descendants. The horse training program Eleanor had pioneered became legendary, and Harrison-trained horses remained sought after well into the 20th century. The values Eleanor and Cole had embedded in their family, respect for hard work, kindness toward others, courage to follow your dreams, were passed down through the generations. The story of how Eleanor and Cole met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren heard about the barn-raising party, about Prudence Whitmore's cruelty and Cole's defiance, about a single dance that had changed two lives and created a dynasty. The old barn where it had all begun eventually fell into disrepair and was torn down, but a historical marker was placed on the site, commemorating the Henderson family and the community that had gathered there. Local historians researching the area's past would occasionally stumble across mentions of Eleanor and Cole Harrison, noting their contributions to the county's development and the unusual love story that had launched their partnership. In the Harrison family home, now occupied by James and Rebecca's children and grandchildren, a special place of honor was given to two items. The first was the green dress Eleanor had worn to that first church service with Cole, carefully preserved in a cedar chest. The second was Eleanor's mother's cameo brooch, the one she had worn on her wedding day, kept in a velvet box and brought out on special occasions to be admired and remembered. The descendants of Eleanor and Cole carried forward their story, using it as a reminder about courage and love and the importance of standing up for what's right. They taught their children that sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected moments, that love can strike fast and true, and that defending someone's right to joy and happiness is always worthwhile. On the 100th anniversary of that barn raising party, the Harrison family held a special celebration. Over 200 people attended, all of them descendants or relatives of Eleanor and Cole. They gathered at the ranch, now expanded to nearly 50,000 acres but still bearing the Harrison name, and celebrated the legacy their ancestors had built. Someone brought a fiddle, and they played the same waltzes that had been popular in 1878. The family members danced on the lawn, spinning and laughing under the Texas stars, honoring the memory of a woman who had been shamed for dancing and the cowboy who had asked her for every dance after. As the music played and the family celebrated, the current generation of Harrisons looked around at everything Eleanor and Cole had created: the thriving ranch, the close-knit family, the values and traditions that had been passed down through 5 generations. All of it had started with a single act of courage and kindness, with a man who had seen a woman's humiliation and decided to do something about it. The love story of Eleanor and Cole Harrison became a cherished family treasure, proof that sometimes the best things in life happen when you're brave enough to reach for them, when you defend what's right regardless of consequences, when you choose love over fear and joy over judgment. Their story reminded each new generation that you never know which moment will change your life, which act of courage or kindness will set you on a path towards something extraordinary. And somewhere, in whatever realm souls go to after death, Eleanor and Cole Harrison danced together still, eternally young and eternally in love, forever grateful for that June evening in 1878 when a barn-raising party, a moment of cruelty, and one cowboy's decision to ask a shamed woman to dance had brought them together and given them a lifetime of love. Their story lived on, passed down through generations, a reminder that love is always worth fighting for, that happiness requires courage, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is ask someone to dance, especially when the world tells them they should sit still and be quiet. Eleanor and Cole had refused to let judgment and small-mindedness dictate their lives, and in doing so, they had created something beautiful and lasting, a love story for the ages, and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The fiddle music played on into the Texas night, and the Harrison family danced, honoring their ancestors and celebrating the love that had started it all. And if you listened carefully, if you let yourself believe in magic just a little bit, you might have heard the echo of other music, older music, from a barn-raising party more than a century ago. You might have seen, just for a moment, 2 figures waltzing together in the moonlight, a woman in a blue calico dress and a cowboy with his hat in his hand, dancing through eternity. Their love story never truly ending, because true love never dies. It just transforms, becoming legend and memory and inspiration for all the generations that follow.